what this presentation is about, us getting together. If we have participants who have something that they want to share with us as well, they can share, not just our speakers. The common theme that I hear from our speakers is that it's community based, and there are communities that are very resilient and very resilient by their nature, probably from the generations of where they've been brought up or where they come from, but also in the fact that we've seen from the stats a higher percentage of self-employed people. Now, is that because they have to, because the international companies will not come into those areas because they're away from urban high density populations? Or is it that the people who live in this area have that entrepreneurial spirit from their heritage and that it's in their blood? A question that I would have for Sam, I know, Sam, that you left home and you went on a spin around America in a baby blue Cadillac, I read.
I did.
Can I ask, so you came home then to work, what about your stats that showed us earlier on? There was a higher percentage that were of older population in your area. The younger population, what are they doing? Are they leaving and not coming back, or are you enticing them back? What's the story?
So the trend of what we call the main brain drain is happening. Like, folks, we have a wonderful college system, university system here in the state that residents are able to access, but far too often they graduate, matriculate, and then are off to another part of the world or another part of the country because of the challenges around finding adequate employment, and because of the workforce challenges that prevent some companies from entering here and providing broader economic support. So one of the things we're hoping to do as part of this work and part of our broader blue bioeconomy work is to really illustrate the variety and diversity of opportunities in the blue bioeconomy, to provide, I think it was mentioned, I see in the chat, the education of these opportunities is often a critical barrier to having folks recognize what they could be doing, and to hopefully bring some of these folks with deep skill sets and deep commitments to the coast and to the state back here to put down roots and start their family. The water was in my blood, and that's what drew me back, and I carved out a position for myself here, and I'm hoping that more and more folks can do that, and we're doing our best to try to pave the way.
Yeah, and it's important, I think, that people who have the skills, who do come back, that they share it and highlight to others. What we find in our local communities, that people go away for a while, and then when they want to settle down with children, they tend to crave the great location where they grew themselves for their next generation, and to facilitate that is a very important part of it. We have a participant here with her hand up, Muireann Ní Chiúnainn. If you'd like to speak, just unmute yourself and go with it.
Hello everyone, my name is Muireann Ní Chiúnainn. I grew up in Macdara. I was his neighbour, and we come from exactly the same background. I'd like to ask the international participants, because I feel that we're reaching a juxtaposition in the Irish community in particular, where all the areas that we're all working in or living in or from are coastal areas, and you come up against this sort of theory where central government think that it should be a touristic gem, and it's almost like it's kept an aspect for the tourists to come and take a picture and have a beautiful time on the Wild Atlantic Way, whereas young people like Macdara and myself have had to go abroad to get a decent salary and a decent career path. But again, as Macdara says, you come back and you want to set up your life back home with your culture, your history, your family, and your area. But what we find on the West Coast, in particular in the Gaelic-speaking area, is the constant barrier we come up against when it comes to trying to get planning permission for a house, in the context that Ireland is going through this evolution where we're trying to be more efficient in planning, in resources, in electricity provision, in low carbon footprints, in housing. But again, when you come to these areas, the prime interest seems to be the tourism dollar, and then you can't get the sustained economy there. But how can you get the people who do the planning and the people who decide your future when it comes to you being able to build a house or build a factory in the area? Sorry if it's long-winded.
No, Red, we understand completely where you're coming from. It's about keeping it pristine and then keeping it livable. Because we have areas on our coast where in the summer they're full of life, where the tourists come in, and in the winter they're just barren. Small pockets of areas. And I know that's a problem in other international areas as well. Can I go to you, Christine, on that? Because I know you come from a very picturesque area as well. No more than, we're very lucky, all of us, all the speakers here do, to be honest. So and also the spread of the work that your organization does is kind of akin to our UDRAS here, which is enterprise and community development and all that. So maybe you'd be able to give your perspective on it.
Yes, yeah, I'll try to answer best. I should caveat, I'm actually from Denmark originally, so I'm an incomer, but very much settled here on the west coast of Scotland. And yeah, I mean, what you say is exactly correct. And so I'm an early 30s professional, and my husband has struggled. I mean, it's taken time to find good paying jobs, and housing is we're getting squeezed out by tourism businesses. Now, it is a really important, obviously, source for livelihoods in the area. We have a huge industry in adventure tourism, which attracts lots of young people to work within that. But on the other hand, yeah, people can't buy, and as you said, it's very difficult to get planning permission. So it's a double-edged sword where I just bought a house just over a year ago, and I was only able to buy it because I bought it through a housing trust, and no Airbnbs were allowed to buy it because I was always competing with someone else who could put a bigger deposit down. I'm not sure I have the answer, but I think, so the fact that I was able to buy we have Communities Housing Trust, so they have developments in the area. So we were able to buy, but also something that's really interesting that's been happening is that the aquaculture companies are really active because they supply a huge amount of jobs here, and they struggle getting people to move here because there's no houses. So they employ people and then they have nowhere to live. And they've also partnered with the Housing Trust on a couple of projects actually where they've developed housing in remote communities. So our organization has supported that often. There was one on an island where we supported a development officer, and then there was capital funding from Scottish government, and then we had the aquaculture companies and the Housing Trust, and they all came together to develop like cheap, affordable housing that people working on the island could access. So it's interesting. So you have both there's the government and there's also the private industry can support this. But it's about I think there's still more needed. And we might be looking at regulation at that point, but I don't want to get into politics.
Yeah, you're right. We're moving into policy and politics here. But it highlights the point that these rural communities are in areas where the raw product, the blue bio product itself, is in a pristine environment, and we want to keep it that way. But then if you don't have people to use it and to sustainably use it, sure, it's just, as you say, as Mairead mentioned, it's just a nice picture. And we've seen, I know I spoke to a fisherman in the past where in his local area, a housing development was built and advertised as a quaint fishing village, and people from outside bought their house there, and then roll on in the winter pelagic season. The same people who were bought in the quaint fishing village were complaining because the not so quaint fishing vessels were landing at silly o'clock for them. But it just shows you the difficulty that we've had some more. I like this conversation because I know it's not strictly blue bio, but the humans are part of the bio as well. And if you don't have the humans, there's as Mairead mentioned, there's very little opportunity for the rest. I'll get back to you. And sorry, just to confirm what we've decided in relation with Cliona and our video clip from Australia is that we will make it available later on, because technical difficulties now is eating into our times. So this chat is better for us, and we wanted this to be kind of a chat system for us. I'll come back to you, Andrew, because you mentioned children, which I was thinking about when our earlier speakers were talking, and the importance of children. And you specifically mentioned the fact that people tend to turn their back to the sea. I always say to my colleagues that one of our biggest kind of projects we should have is to remind the people of Ireland that they're islanders. We all are on this island. We're all islanders. So maybe I come to you it has a kind of a nice link to what Murad was mentioning about future generations.
Okay. Well, first, can I just say, anybody, it's Andrew Tinnishon. Just before this started, my computer through a wobbler, and Gillian kindly gave me the computer. So it's, if anything comes up with Gillian, it's actually Andrew. Look, I mean, there is little doubt. We have, to a large extent, turned it back to the sea. I was quoted a long time ago on RT radio as saying, successive governments since the foundation of the state, that their treatment of the whitefish industry in this case was bordering on the criminally negligent. So that's where I come from. That's the way I see it. Look, we are an island nation. We certainly, the truth is, we couldn't elect hardly a county councillor, and certainly not a TD, because there's isolated numbers of people in small areas. So we haven't got the political will. So when things are being negotiated, we're always on the back foot. That's just the truth of the matter. But we have to realize that, and we have to make more with less. And that's why the bioeconomy and things like that. But you can't get there without engaging the future generations and engaging people from the beginning. And that's what, in some ways, when I say we, the truth of the matter is, the Irish Basque and Shark group were the main people in those projects, and we are certainly delighted to facilitate them and help them, and other projects. But I mean, that is the truth. You need to, I seen in the chat there that in Maine they found something similar. You need to engage young people from a very early age to change mindsets in relation to the sea.
Yeah, and I would like to add to what you mentioned there, Andrew, is that these kind of projects like the Basking Shark project, obviously that was somebody smart enough to leverage a project that was happening already to be able to educate the youngsters as well at the same time. Because I know I've been involved in projects where maybe I haven't leveraged it as much, or I haven't linked up in with the community project, with the community or a small school or something that could benefit more from it, which is a kind of a lesson to us all. And that if we are doing projects, and if we can see that it can be used to further educate our youngsters to relatively little expense to the actual project itself, it should be done. We had an interesting one here a few years ago where we had a project EU project in conjunction with ourselves in Wales, where the main part of the project was an art project where images were created by artists to help educate the communities on marine related matters. But I won't be eating any more time. I'll move on to Ethna. Ethna, you have your hand up there. If you unmute, you can make a comment.
Hi, Magdara. Yeah, I was, and thanks a million, Tashanwa. This is a very good opportunity and great discussion. I suppose I've retired now from education and training, but I would have been very involved in setting up training programs. And I think it is so important. I remember saying to people, look at that blue all around Ireland. That is the sea, the blue economy. There's so much we need to do. And as Angus, I think, said that we had turned our back on it, I definitely believe that. But I think once you create the opportunities for young people in primary, and then others who want to live here in the likes of Connemara, Kerry, Donegal, and all along the seaboard, if you create opportunities in the rural communities, young people will stay for sure. And I know, our own organisation would have set up training programs in partnership with the Marine Institute and the Udaros there, to make sure that every level, from primary to second level and on to further ed and training where I was, we're getting the opportunities to look at new technologies in aquaculture, in fishing. And as you know yourself, there's been a lot of discussion around whether aquaculture, the new sometimes brings, you know, people get a bit concerned about it, but we have to look to the future and the opportunities that it provides. So I think very, very interesting, but I do believe that from the young age with children in primary, you know, make them aware of the opportunities and have them there for them. I think that's the key, really. And as Murray there said about, you know, opportunities for young people to base themselves, people to come back and live in the rural community. I think that's another discussion, but it's a big one and needs to be had. If people are sincere and honest in governments about how to sustain rural communities, there has to be a link between those opportunities for the locals to live and, you know, have good, sustainable futures is the key. So, Shin mo fisa, Makdara, Vermila.
Gurmahad. And just in the chat there, you will have seen that Murray's issue that was brought up there on is the same in Kerry as well, where they have problems with people being able to afford their forever homes and not being able to build on their own site and having to compete with Airbnb and stuff like Christine mentioned. There was another question I had that I would like to bring up, and I think it's an important topic that Christine mentioned, is the women in this equation. There was a very interesting statistic there where she said that 38% of the social enterprises were led by women. And I mentioned that I had a theory on it, which I'll be able to divulge now. My theory on this is that women have a capacity, this is me now talking as a man, that women have a capacity to look into the future better than any man. I feel it's a biological thing because I'm a biological scientist, so that's where I think it comes from. But so that may have an impact on the 38% stat there, Christine, that you mentioned. But also, I think the fact that maybe, as I mentioned earlier on, that women are underrepresented in the stats. So I'll come back to you, maybe Sam, on that. What's your experience in Maine with? I know women; they're very important and very good women in Maine. I'm sure working in this economy too. I'll let you expand on that maybe.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. And just one little data point, of the 133 folks that we helped through our aquaculture business, more than 70 of them were women. And of all the ones that still have successful businesses, every single one of them is a woman. So we're already starting to recognize this opportunity, because for so long they have played critical roles in the functioning of our heritage fisheries in a variety of forms, and are now poised to bring that expertise and experience to bear with their own ventures should they decide to. There are still significant barriers to the access to the capital that folks need to start businesses. And that's one of the things that we are going to be implementing moving forward. I mentioned some of our other programming, bringing more diverse faces to the blue economy. One of these is our Women on the Water, and how do we focus more of our efforts on creating these opportunities and reducing these barriers to entry to increase their presence on aquaculture and heritage fisheries and things like that. So the ones that we know and we have had the privilege of working with are incredibly successful. And I think they set the precedent for what our coast could start to look like, a little bit less like you and me, Makdara, and some more diversity there.
Yeah, and just to clarify there, we had a comment from somebody saying that not all women are future seeing witches. That's not where I'm coming from. In our culture, they were the Dreid, they were Druids, they were the women and the men were equally important in our culture in the past. And unfortunately, it changed after the advent of Roman influence and Christianity. But that's another day's discussion. Murad, do you have your hand up for something else? I'd like to bring you in, not because you're a woman, but because you have your hand up. So,
just a bit of observational feedback. Two things. I currently work for the Marine Society C&F, which are the oldest maritime welfare charities internationally, and then the C&F are a young youth development charity. So we have 15,000 young people aged between 10 and 18 sailing and learning all the skills through navigation and the discipline of the mercantile navy to teach them life skills. That's happening every week. The point being that we run outreach programs to get young people interested in the sea cadets as a hobby, and that starts at the age of 7 to 9 in the summer, and then they can come back, and once they're 10 years old, they can become a sea cadet, and once they're 12, they can get their powerboat license. But it starts that young, being the point, that they can get excited about either the mercantile aspect of the marine economy, which is more what I'm into, or the marine biology as well. There is a strong connection as a young sea cadet going off to do either environmental studies or marine biology studies once they start forming their opinion as what they want to do as a young person. The second thing is women and marine, or women and the merchant navy. We have got the IMO, which is the UN of the maritime world, the International Maritime Organization, to have a Women in Shipping day that happens internationally every year. But we have a homegrown success with an example I'd just like to specify. It's TG Cahar, and in 2020 they dedicated a strategy where it was if you can't see her, she won't be there. And that was 20% of all sports coverage was to do with women's sports. So if there's a framework that you can borrow from, where you look at your social media or you look at your promotion of careers within the sector that you're representing, you do have to commit to 20% or a certain 50-50 split to get other young women to see these women there. And like, you could get a pushback to say, well, we're all equal nowadays, but the fact of the matter is our industries, both merchant and marine, haven't had the exposure that other industries have, like engineering, like anything like business, where you see young women think of that first, rather than position an alternative which can foster their entrepreneurial spirit and help them on a way to visualize the type of life that they want now. So I definitely would say to have a look at what TG Cahar did in terms of both pushing the balance with presenters and analysts of sport, and then the amount of exposure they gave to a dedicated sector within sport. That's
interesting that an organization, you know, a leading Irish organization, which is our national TV company, could take that strategy and the effect that that will have. And to be honest, I prefer watching ladies football to men's football because it's better to watch. It's a better game. But that's another conversation over a pint, I think. I'd like to bring Christine here in again, if I may, Christine, because I know in you touched on earlier on that you worked internationally with policy and the FAO, and I'm interested in the links between community-led and rural community experiences and how that feeds into international policy and how important that is. And it's probably linked to what Mairead was touching on there, on how policy can actually help society move in a more sustainable and a fairer way.
Yes, so I've worked for FAO, and you're probably all familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's a framework for sustainable development, but part of it is gender. And for the UN, it's quite important to promote gender equality across the sectors. So if we're looking at seaweed farming, which I worked in internationally, seaweed is traditionally actually done by women in lots of communities, especially in Africa. So it provides those kind of where the men might be going out to fisheries, the women are on the shore-based businesses, so they're still near the communities where they need to be. So it's interesting that it actually is quite key for those particular regions. I think, was there other parts to your question?
There was, Christine. It was in the experience, not just confined to women now, but in the general experience from local communities and the blue bioeconomy, and how that feeds into international policy for the FAO. Or is there a link, or should there be a link? Or how does one help the other?
Yes. Well, so this 2022 is also the year for artisanal fisheries and aquaculture. So it's very much highlighting the small scale fisheries and aquaculture, which are really important for supporting communities through work in the blue economy. So FAO's work is often working with lots of national governments, trying to push those policies to support these, because these, what we call artisanal, and that will include probably many of the people's background in this webinar, they're often threatened because they can't make their livelihoods work, or maybe young people are migrating out of communities. So it's each individual country will need to make their own policies, but there is a huge push to highlight the opportunities, both by governments need to provide support to them, but also there's the whole knowledge area. So transferring knowledge between countries and communities on, okay, what diversification opportunities are there? So like Sam talked about in Maine, lobster fisheries are threatened, so they're looking at diversifying into aquaculture. So that piece of knowledge, transferring that is really important, because it really can support those communities to sustain. And I think, I mean, the coastal communities, we can't lose them, and we need to, those livelihoods need to be retained, and the production needs to be retained. So yeah, I think just promoting that internationally is important, but there isn't, it really comes down to each country. But I think the international link is really important in linking those. So it's been very helpful today seeing what Sam's doing and what you're doing in Ireland and other places, for me to think, okay, what can I take back to Scotland? What exactly. Am I missing?
Just to follow up on that, Christine, that's something that we're trying to, I suppose, do here in Nuala Mara, is to showcase that knowledge transfer piece, bring international speakers together so that we can see what's happening in Maine, what can we implement here in Ireland. And there's a huge learning curve there as well with, I suppose, the intercontinental learning, but also in terms of the educational piece for children. It's something we're trying to push. We did a small pilot scale, I suppose, marine Clór na Mara, so a marine program for secondary schools. And I was shocked that 2 coastal community schools had absolutely no idea what was happening on their doorstep. So there's a huge educational piece that's required, I think, nationally here in Ireland to inform people what is the blue economy, what's the blue bioeconomy, who's working there, highlight some, I suppose, amazing career opportunities and people working in this sector. So even just the feedback we got from the 4 schools that we visited, their eyes were open to, I suppose, opportunities they'd never thought of before. So this is just one organisation trying to do this. And I think maybe down the line, this is something that we could look at joining forces with other, I suppose, organisations, or bringing the department into it to see, is there anything, I suppose, that we can push from the marine sector. Teachers are busy, they can't always, I suppose, be aware of what's happening in the sector. I guess BIM are trying to do something with their ARC bus, their movable, I suppose, unit that showcases to children at primary and secondary what's happening in the marine sector. And I guess Etna's done a fantastic job with the courses that she's organised in conjunction with Maura Nienu and Lutheros, in, I suppose, providing an educational tool there to upskill in the marine sector. But I suppose we need to look at it from the wider picture and bring in the primary schools as well.
Yeah, that's a very important thing. And also, if anybody goes onto the Marine Institute website, we have the Explorers educational part of it, Explorers program as well, which helps to integrate marine science into the national, the primary level education system. But I'd like to come back to Sam, if I may, because I was interested, Sam, in what you were talking about relation to climate resilience or climate change resilience and the lessons that we can learn, because we see even in our most highly efficient and industrialized fleet here in Ireland, they're talking about making their fleet greener by decarbonizing as much as they can. We know for a fact that it's probably the cheapest carbon protein you can produce is from the sea. I don't think many citizens know that or realize that. That is the least costly, if it's done rightly and sustainably, obviously, it's the least costly protein that we can consume. And with world population hitting 8 billion now, according to the UN, we will need a source of protein. So Can I come back to you, because I'm interested in you mentioned the climate resilience and the projects you're working on. Can you just maybe give us a bit more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are engaged in creating what we're referring to as a series of of resilience hubs. And these are working with marine businesses that play a critical role in the rural economy and in the overall seafood supply chain to both reduce their shoreside carbon footprint by connecting them to clean energy solutions. We just worked with a fisheries co-op that is putting in a 500,000 kilowatt hour solar array to power their processing facility and their shoreside infrastructure associated with that. At the same time, we're looking to connect these folks to the new electric refrigeration trucks that are able to meet their needs and to create these locations whereby more efficient supply chains can happen. And really what we're trying to do is start with the shore side, where some of the more common solutions are available, where we know clean energy solutions, efficiency work, weatherization and insulation of cold storage and things like that are ready-made solutions. And at the same time, we're trying to push the envelope and help those folks that are the innovators, as we call them, and the early adopters, take those first steps into electric vessel propulsion on the shore side. And while here we're a few years away from fully electric lobster boats, the aquaculture sector is poised to take advantage of some advances in electric outboard technology and battery technology that in a matter of years, we could have a fully decarbonized aquaculture fleet on the coast if organizations like ours and others are able to help buy down the initial risk through grant investments and low interest financing to help demonstrate the utility of these things. Because as I'm sure we all know, some of the most skeptical folks are those that make their living off of the sea. They need to know a solution is going to work if they're putting their lives on the line on the ocean. So we're really trying to direct those two phases of work towards kind of fully decarbonizing our supply chain, focusing first on those early adopters and those places that play critical roles and can provide the lesson outward to others.
Yes, and obviously there's efficiencies here and savings for the companies themselves and their energy costs, and in relation to higher energy prices, it's a hot topic at the moment. But do you think that they will have a competitive advantage for marketing when they can show that the carbon associated with their kilo or product is lower than others?
Absolutely. We're already starting to see this. So our partner is Luke's Lobster. It's the vertically integrated company that has restaurant fronts in addition to its supply chain and processing all across the world. And they are able to charge a premium and thus return more profit back to the fishermen and women that they support because of their commitment to these triple bottom line principles, to the governance issues, the environmental issues, and the economic issues. So absolutely, Makhtara, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. And I think on that positive note of that there was a competitive advantage, which is what every local community wants available for people, that we should bring this session to a close. I'd like to thank all our speakers from all around. I know I learned a lot, and I hope that you learned something as well. And our participants, I'd like to especially thank them for sending in their chat questions and speaking up. It was nice to be able to chat, because it's not as comfortable when you just have a presentation and you don't have the opportunity to raise other issues that people may have thought of. I'd like to thank you all. I think Cliona will make the video available for us from Australia, and it'll be available on her social media links. So thank you all. Gamila Mahagi, and I'll say small.
Go on with her.